My name is Jason. I used to believe I had the perfect life. A loving wife, Amanda, a cozy home in the suburbs of New York, and a sense of security that made everything seem just right. Amanda and I met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was captivating, her laughter infectious, her wit sharp. When she looked at me, I felt like the only man in the world. Our love story seemed like it came straight out of a romantic novel. From lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and crosswords to spontaneous road trips to nowhere, every moment with Amanda felt like a dream. When I proposed to her on a snowy December evening in Central Park, she said yes with tears in her eyes, and I promised myself I'd do whatever it took to make her happy. But lately, something had shifted. It was subtle at first. Missed kisses in the morning, half-hearted smiles during dinner. Amanda's phone seemed to be glued to her hand more often than not, and she'd step out to take calls she claimed were work-related. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a rough patch, something all couples go through. One evening, Amanda told me she was going to a small gathering with friends, just a casual evening with people I didn't know very well. "You don't have to come," she said with a sweet smile. "It's nothing exciting. Just catching up with James and a few others." James. I vaguely remembered her mentioning him. A friend from her college days, someone she hadn't seen in years. I trusted Amanda. Why wouldn't I? We'd built a life together, and trust was the foundation of everything. But as she walked out the door that night, I couldn't shake a strange feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. It wasn't jealousy, not really. It was something darker, something I couldn't quite name yet. Amanda left the house that evening dressed in a way I hadn't seen in a while. Her hair was done up in loose waves, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She wore the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, paired with heels that made her legs look endless. "You look amazing," I said, and she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Too quick. Don't wait up," she added with a playful smile as she walked out the door. I watched her leave, the sound of her heels clicking on the driveway echoing in my ears long after she was gone. The house felt unnervingly quiet. I turned on the TV, flipped through channels, but nothing held my attention. My mind kept drifting back to her smile, the way her tone had been just a little too casual when she mentioned James. An hour passed, then 2. I found myself pacing the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Why was I so restless? Amanda had never given me a reason not to trust her, but tonight felt different. I decided to distract myself by cleaning up the kitchen, and as I wiped the counter, I noticed her phone charger still plugged into the wall. That's when the idea struck me. What if I just went to the party? Not to spy on her. I wasn't that kind of person, but to surprise her. Maybe I'd been overthinking things, and seeing her in her element would put my mind at ease. Besides, James was just an old friend, right? I grabbed my coat and keys, telling myself I'd only stay for a few minutes. As I drove, I realized I didn't even know the exact address. But Amanda had mentioned it was at James' place, and a quick search on my phone pulled up the location. A sleek apartment in the city, the kind I could never imagine affording on my salary. The streets were alive with the hum of New York nightlife. When I arrived, I could hear the faint thrum of music from the building. The doorman hesitated when I told him I was there for James' party, but he eventually let me through. I took the elevator to the penthouse, feeling the nervous energy build in my chest. The elevator doors opened to a scene straight out of a magazine. The apartment was modern and immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city skyline. People were scattered in small groups, laughing, sipping cocktails. But my eyes scanned the room for one person, Amanda. I spotted her almost immediately. She was standing near the bar, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something James had said. He was standing close, too close. My chest tightened as I saw him lean in, his hand brushing her arm, and then it happened. He kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck, not something innocent. It was deliberate, and she didn't pull away. She didn't even look surprised. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I couldn't move. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. And then, as if she sensed me, Amanda turned her head. Her smile froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened in shock, her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. James stepped back, confused, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I walked toward her slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "Jason," she stammered, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. "Really? Because it looks exactly like what it is." "No," she said quickly, stepping closer. "It's just James. He's an old friend and it was a friendly kiss. That's all." "You're overreacting." "Overreacting." The word echoed in my mind, but I said nothing. Instead, I nodded, plastering on a smile that felt foreign on my face. "Of course," I said evenly. "Just a friendly kiss." I turned and walked out of the apartment without looking back, leaving her standing there, calling my name. The drive home was a blur. The city lights streaked across the windshield, but I barely noticed them. Amanda's voice echoed in my head, her rushed explanation, her insistence that it was just a friendly kiss. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but the anger I expected didn't come. Instead, there was something worse, doubt. Was I overreacting? Could it really have been innocent? After all, Amanda had never given me a reason to mistrust her before. But then, why had she hesitated when she saw me? Why did James look so comfortable, like this wasn't the first time? By the time I pulled into the driveway, my mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. I stepped into the house and closed the door behind me, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The living room felt colder, emptier, as if the warmth Amanda once brought to this home had evaporated. I poured myself a drink, hoping it would calm my nerves, but it only made the unease grow. My eyes drifted to the couch where Amanda and I used to sit, laughing at bad movies or sharing stories about our day. I tried to picture her there, the way she used to lean against me, her laughter filling the room. But now, all I could see was her standing in that apartment with James, his lips on hers. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through old messages from Amanda. Most of them were mundane grocery lists, reminders about appointments. But a few stood out, messages she'd sent over the past few weeks that I hadn't thought much about at the time. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Meeting some friends after work. I'll be home late." Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. My chest tightened as I thought about all the times I trusted her without question. Had I been blind? Or was I letting my imagination get the better of me? I thought about calling her, demanding answers, but what would I even say? I didn't want to come across as paranoid or insecure. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they consumed me. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, searching for any detail that might explain what I'd seen. As the hours dragged on, the doubt began to fester into something darker. I started to question everything. Her late nights, her sudden interest in her appearance, the way she'd been distant lately. I even thought back to the way she'd laughed at James' jokes, the way she'd looked at him. Unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right, I opened her social media. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know. Her posts were the usual. Pictures of us, updates about her work. But then I noticed something odd. She'd tagged James in a photo a few weeks ago, a group picture from what she'd called a work event. I zoomed in, studying her smile, the way she stood just a little too close to him. My heart sank further. It wasn't proof of anything, but it felt like a breadcrumb leading me down a path I didn't want to follow. I wanted to believe her, to trust her, but the seed of doubt had already taken root, and it was growing fast. When the clock struck midnight, I realized she still hadn't come home. My phone buzzed. Finally, a text from her. "Staying out a bit later. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, the anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. She didn't even mention seeing me at the party, didn't try to explain further or apologize. It was as if she expected me to accept her story without question, to brush it off like it didn't matter. But it mattered. It mattered more than anything. I knew I couldn't let this go, but I also knew I needed a plan. Confronting her head-on wouldn't get me the answers I needed. If she was hiding something, I'd have to find out on my own. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if Amanda would be there to catch me if I fell. The next morning, Amanda returned home just before sunrise. I heard the soft creak of the front door and the shuffle of her heels against the hardwood floor. My chest tightened as I lay in bed, pretending to sleep. The weight of the previous night still hung heavy in the air. I heard her sigh as she slipped into the bathroom, the sound of running water masking her movements. When she finally climbed into bed beside me, I could feel her hesitation, the way her body didn't settle comfortably against mine like it used to. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I let the silence speak for me. The day passed in a fog. Amanda acted as if nothing had happened, flitting around the house with a casualness that felt almost rehearsed. She hummed while making coffee, scrolled through her phone, and laughed at something she saw online. But I couldn't shake the image of her and James, couldn't erase the way her face had looked when she saw me at the party. Caught. By evening, I decided I couldn't sit with my doubts any longer. I needed clarity. I needed to understand what exactly I'd walked into. Amanda was in the shower when I slipped into the living room and picked up her phone from the coffee table. My heart pounded as I unlocked it. She'd never changed her passcode, a detail that almost made me feel guilty for what I was about to do. Almost. I scrolled through her messages, half expecting to find nothing, to feel the weight of my paranoia crush me. But then I saw his name, James. The thread wasn't extensive, but it was damning. Messages about how much fun she'd had the last time they met. A photo of them clinking glasses over dinner. And then, a message from the night before. I can't stop thinking about last night. See you soon. My grip on the phone tightened as I stared at the screen, my mind racing. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Was she that confident I wouldn't check? Or had she simply stopped caring? I put the phone back where I'd found it and sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and the picture they painted was devastating. Amanda's excuses, her distant behavior, the way she'd brushed off my concerns. It all made sense now. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. Was this who Amanda truly was? Had she been lying to me all along? Or was this something new? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? The next morning, Amanda suggested we go out for brunch, as if everything were fine. I played along, forcing a smile and nodding at all the right moments, but inside, I was seething. Every laugh, every casual touch felt like a betrayal. By the time we returned home, I knew I needed to confront her. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, Amanda's phone buzzed on the counter. Her face froze when she saw the name on the screen. James. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but she simply turned the phone over, hiding the screen. It's just work, she said, her voice unconvincing. That's funny, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Because James doesn't work with you, does he? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But instead, she shook her head and said, You're being ridiculous, Jason. He's just a friend. You're making this into something it's not. Her denial was the final straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had a plan now, a way to make her understand the pain she'd caused me. And when I was done, she'd have no choice but to face the truth. The next few days were a delicate balancing act. I had to pretend everything was fine. Even though every glance at Amanda filled me with anger and betrayal, I couldn't let her suspect anything, not yet. I needed time to think, to prepare, to make sure I didn't act out of blind rage. If I was going to confront her, I wanted it to leave an impact. My plan started to take shape that evening, while Amanda was out running errands. I sat at the dining table, her betrayal replaying in my mind like a broken record. I opened my laptop and began making notes, piecing together every inconsistency in her story, every red flag I'd ignored. If she wanted to deny what I'd seen, I'd make it impossible for her to lie her way out of it. First, I needed proof. something undeniable. Her messages with James were incriminating, but I wanted more. I'd noticed she'd become more protective of her phone lately, keeping it within arm's reach at all times. If I could gain access to it again, I might find something else. A photo, an email, anything that would expose the truth. The second part of my plan was less logical, more emotional. I wanted Amanda to understand how deeply she'd hurt me, to feel the weight of her actions. Kicking her out of the house seemed like the obvious answer, but I wanted her to feel the betrayal, the humiliation, the loss. She had taken away my trust, my peace of mind, everything that made our marriage feel safe. That night, while Amanda slept, I made my move. Her phone was charging on her nightstand, and I waited until her breathing became slow and even before I reached for it. My hands trembled as I unlocked it and began scrolling through her photos. What I found made my blood run cold. There were pictures of her and James. Selfies at a bar, candid shots of them laughing together, even one of them sitting on a couch, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. But it wasn't just the photos. There were messages, too. Flirty, intimate messages that left no room for doubt. I can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I wish I could stay longer. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my chest tightening with every word. It was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was an affair, plain and simple. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it and left the room, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to wake her up, to confront her right then and there. But I knew it wasn't the right time. I needed to be smart about this. The next day, I took the first tangible step in my plan. I packed Amanda's belongings. I didn't want to do it in anger, so I worked methodically, folding her clothes neatly and placing them in suitcases. I left out the little things, her toothbrush, her favorite book, items she'd have to come back for. I wanted her to see what she'd done, to understand that there was no going back. When Amanda came home that evening, she was in a good mood, humming to herself as she walked through the door. She didn't notice the suitcases at first, but when she did, her face fell. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. I stood in the doorway of the living room, arms crossed. "It's time for you to go, Amanda." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? Go where?" "To James," I said, my voice cold. "I'm sure he'll be happy to have you." The color drained from her face, and she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to come up with an explanation, a way to talk her way out of this. "Jason," she finally said, her voice breaking, "it's not what you think. Please, let me explain." I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't. I've seen the messages, the pictures. I know everything. So don't insult me by pretending this is something it's not." Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the texts, the pictures, the lies. I steeled myself, refusing to let her tears sway me. "I trusted you," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" She fell to her knees, sobbing, begging me to listen. But I'd already made up my mind. "Get out, Amanda," I said, my voice firm. "You don't belong here anymore." As she gathered her things and walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness. But most of all, I felt empty. The door slammed shut behind Amanda, and for a moment, the house felt suffocatingly quiet. The kind of silence that presses into your chest and fills every corner of your mind. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd just been, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. The next morning, I woke up in the same clothes I'd worn the day before, sprawled across the couch. My head throbbed, but it wasn't from alcohol. It was from the endless spiral of thoughts that had consumed me all night. I'd replayed the confrontation over and over. Her tears, her pleas, her silence when I confronted her with the truth. I picked up my phone and scrolled through her social media, half expecting her to post something cryptic or dramatic. But there was nothing. No updates, no photos, no trace of her anywhere. A part of me felt relieved, I didn't want her broadcasting our private life for the world to see. But another part of me wondered where she was, what she was doing, and if she was with him. Later that day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't pretend everything was fine. Instead, I spent hours cleaning the house, trying to scrub away the memories of Amanda. I threw out her favorite candles, boxed up the books she'd left behind, and even considered repainting the walls just to erase any trace of her. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape her. Every corner of the house held a memory. The couch where we used to cuddle, the kitchen where she'd laugh while making her terrible attempts at pancakes, the bed we once shared. It was like living in a museum of a life that no longer existed. The first time I ran into one of our mutual friends, it was at the grocery store. Emily, a friend of Amanda's, spotted me in the cereal aisle and immediately rushed over. "Jason," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. "You heard?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Amanda told me you two were going through a rough patch. She's staying at a friend's place right now." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain calm. "Did she tell you why?" Emily hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "She mentioned there were trust issues, but I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Amanda loves you, Jason. She talks about you all the time." I let out a bitter laugh. If she loved me, she wouldn't have been sneaking around with James. Emily's eyes widened, and she took a step back. I didn't know about that." "Yeah," I said, my voice cold. "Not exactly something she'd brag about, is it?" After that encounter, word spread quickly. People started reaching out, some offering their support, others fishing for gossip. I ignored most of them, focusing instead on piecing my life back together. One evening, about a week after I'd kicked Amanda out, I received a message from James. I hadn't expected him to reach out, and seeing his name on my phone sent a surge of anger through me. The message was short and unapologetic. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to confront him, to let him know exactly what I thought of him. But another part of me wondered what he could possibly say that would make any of this better. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Fine. Name the time and place." We met the next evening at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. I arrived early, sitting near the window where I could see him approach. When he walked in, I was struck by how normal he looked. He wasn't the charming villain I'd built up in my mind. He was just a man who'd made a choice that had shattered my life. "Jason," he said, sitting down across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." I didn't respond. My arms crossed as I stared at him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm not here to make excuses. What happened with Amanda, it was wrong. I know that. But you deserve to know the truth." My heart pounded as he spoke, each word slicing through me like a knife. He told me how it started, how they'd grown close during late nights at work, how one thing had led to another. He claimed it wasn't planned, that it just happened. But I couldn't bring myself to believe him. "I regret it," he said, his voice low. "I never wanted to hurt you. But Jason, you need to know, Amanda cares about you. She's been a mess since you kicked her out. She wants to make things right." I shook my head, anger bubbling to the surface. She had her chance. She made her choice. James nodded, his expression somber. "I understand. But if you ever decide to give her another chance, I think she'd do whatever it takes to make it up to you." I left the coffee shop feeling more conflicted than ever. Part of me wanted to leave everything behind, to start fresh without Amanda or the weight of her betrayal. But another part of me couldn't shake the memories of the life we'd built together, the love we'd once shared. As I drove home, I realized I was at a crossroads. The choices I made in the coming weeks would shape the rest of my life. The night after my meeting with James, I sat alone in the house, surrounded by the quiet hum of appliances and the flickering light of the TV. But I wasn't paying attention to the screen. My mind was consumed by the weight of everything he had said. Could Amanda really be a mess? Was her regret genuine? Or was it just a desperate attempt to hold on to the life she'd ruined? I found myself staring at my phone, her number glaring back at me. A part of me wanted to call, to hear her voice, to see if she had the courage to tell me the truth now that the walls were closing in. Another part of me wanted to delete her number and move on, erasing her from my life entirely. But I couldn't let it go. Not yet. The next morning I made a decision. If I was going to move forward, whether with or without her, I needed closure. I needed to hear her side of the story, not through tears or manipulative excuses, but the raw, unfiltered truth. I called Amanda, my hands trembling as the phone rang. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hesitant. "Jason, we need to talk," I said, cutting straight to the point. There was a pause. "Okay. When?" "Tonight. Here. 7 o'clock. She agreed without hesitation, her tone filled with a mix of relief and anxiety. As I hung up, I felt a knot of tension settle in my stomach. When evening came, I prepared for her arrival. I didn't just want to talk. I wanted her to see the damage she'd done. I left her packed suitcases by the door, a silent reminder of what she'd thrown away. I spread out the evidence I'd gathered on the dining table, screenshots of her messages with James, printed photos of them together, and even the handwritten vows we'd exchanged on our wedding day. By the time the doorbell rang, I was ready. Amanda stood on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She wasn't wearing the confident, polished mask she usually did. Instead, she looked raw, vulnerable. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Her eyes widened as she saw the suitcases, then the evidence laid out on the table. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her hands trembling. "Sit," I said, my voice firm but calm. She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair across from me. For a moment, we sat in silence, the tension in the room almost unbearable. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this to us?" She looked down at her hands, tears pooling in her eyes. "I don't have an excuse, Jason. I messed up. I let things go too far with James, and I hate myself for it." "Things went too far?" I echoed, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You didn't just trip and fall into his arms, Amanda. This was a choice. Multiple choices. Over and over again." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to explain." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling as she continued. "It started with work. We spent a lot of time together on projects, late nights at the office. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. But then, I don't know, Jason, I was lonely. You were so distant lately, so focused on work and everything else. And I was stupid. I let myself believe that what James and I had was harmless, that it didn't mean anything." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "And yet it meant enough for you to lie to me, to betray me." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You're right. There's no excuse. I was selfish and stupid, and I ruined everything. But Jason, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd once been my world. But now, she was a stranger, someone I barely recognized. "Do you know what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what it's like to question everything? To wonder if the person you trusted most was lying the whole time?" "I do," she said, her voice breaking, "and I hate myself for it. Jason, I'll do anything to fix this. Anything." I shook my head, standing up from the table. "I don't think you can, Amanda. Some things can't be undone." She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I walked to the window, staring out at the darkened street. "I need time," I said finally, my back still turned to her. "Time to figure out what's next. Whether I can even look at you without seeing this betrayal." She nodded, her voice hoarse. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait, Jason. However long it takes, I'll wait." When she left that night, the house felt emptier than ever. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of clarity. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Amanda wasn't in control anymore. I was. The days following Amanda's visit felt lighter, though not entirely free of the weight that had been suffocating me. Her words echoed in my mind. Her regret, her pleas, her promise to wait. But I refused to let myself be drawn back into the emotional storm she'd created. I focused on small victories. Each day, I committed to doing one thing for myself. Cooking a meal I liked, taking a long drive, or finally fixing the broken shelf in the garage. It wasn't much, but it helped. Bit by bit, I started reclaiming the parts of my life that had been overshadowed by her betrayal. One afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood. It was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that once felt comforting but now felt foreign. I passed by families playing in their yards, couples walking hand in hand. It stirred something in me, a pang of longing for what I'd lost, but also a flicker of hope that, someday, I might find it again. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd unintentionally distanced myself from during my marriage. They welcomed me back without hesitation, offering support without prying into the details of what had happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a lifeline. One night, while scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon a photo of Amanda and me from our first anniversary. We were laughing, our faces pressed close together, completely oblivious to the cracks that would later form. I stared at it for a long time before finally deleting it. It wasn't about erasing her from my life. It was about letting go of the version of us that no longer existed. A few weeks later, just as I was beginning to feel like the pieces of my life were slowly falling into place, something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday evening, and I was at a local bookstore, browsing the aisles aimlessly. Books had always been my escape, and I found solace in losing myself in fictional worlds where problems could be solved by the end of the last chapter. As I reached for a novel on the top shelf, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jason." I froze, my hand hovering over the book. Turning slowly, I found myself face to face with Emily, Amanda's friend, the one I'd bumped into at the grocery store weeks earlier. "Hey, Emily," I said cautiously. She looked surprised but not uncomfortable. "I didn't expect to see you here. How've you been?" "Better," I replied curtly. Emily hesitated, then said, "Can I be honest with you?" Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Sure." She glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, then lowered her voice. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I feel like you deserve to know. Amanda wasn't entirely truthful about everything." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "She told me the whole thing with James was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything," Emily said. "But I overheard something at a party a few months ago. James was bragging to a coworker about how he'd been seeing Amanda for almost a year. A year!" My voice came out louder than I intended, and a few people turned to look at us. Emily winced. "I thought you knew." "I'm sorry, Jason. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to get involved." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A year. That wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. That was a full-blown affair. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice cold and flat. Emily nodded, her expression sympathetic. "For what it's worth, I think you're better off without her." I left the bookstore without buying anything, my mind racing. The revelation shattered whatever lingering doubt I'd had about whether I'd made the right decision. Amanda's betrayal wasn't just a crack in our relationship. It was a chasm too deep to ever bridge. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and an odd sense of relief. I had my answer now. There was no going back. The next morning, I packed the last of Amanda's things into boxes and put them on the porch. No more second chances. No more wondering if she'd really change. When Amanda showed up, I didn't even look at her. She started apologizing before she even reached the door, but I was done listening. "You don't get to come back," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Not after everything. Not after the lies." She tried to speak, to explain, but I was already shutting the door on her. As the lock clicked into place, A weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying lifted off my shoulders. I was free. A few months passed. Life started to feel normal again. Quiet, peaceful, and mine. I found new hobbies, rekindled old friendships, and focused on my work. One evening, I sat on my couch, staring out the window. For the first time in a long time, I felt content. Not because I had everything figured out, but because I had learned to live with the scars. I didn't have the answers to all of life's questions, but I was learning how to heal, one step at a time. Thank you for following this journey with me. If you've ever gone through betrayal, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to comment and subscribe.